Imagine this. The world is shouting, chaos is rising, everything you care about seems to be falling apart. And yet, in the center of the storm, there is one quiet place. You. Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever felt like life is pulling every string just to see if you'll snap? Like every moment is designed to test the edges of your sanity, your patience, and your strength. Let me tell you something powerful. You are not meant to break, you are meant to bend, learn, and rise. In our modern world, we wear business like a badge of honor. But what if I told you that calm is not a luxury, it's your power? When everything is trying to break you, the most revolutionary thing you can do is stay still inside. Sinek once said, "The ability to be alone with your thoughts is where true clarity begins." Solitude is not a retreat from life. It's the training ground for inner strength. When the pressure builds, instead of panicking, pause. Instead of exploding, exhale, breathe. Because in that breath, you find control, you find awareness, you find choice. Calm doesn't mean you're not hurting. It doesn't mean you're not confused. Calm means you've decided not to let the external chaos control your internal peace. Life will try to break you. But remember this, you don't grow despite the storm, you grow because of it. Every trial is asking, will you react or will you rise? So, the next time everything feels too much, don't seek escape, seek understanding. Sit in solitude. Reflect. Listen, not to the world but to your soul. Because when you become the calm in your own storm, nothing, not failure, not fear, not chaos, can break you. In a world that constantly bombards us with noise, opinions, distractions, and demands, we've come to confuse stillness with laziness and solitude with loneliness. We are conditioned to believe that value comes from being constantly connected, online, updated, informed, available. But when everything outside gets loud, the real wisdom lies in going inward. It's in those moments of quiet that we rediscover who we truly are. Solitude is not a weakness. In fact, it's one of the most underrated and misunderstood forms of strength. It's the place where clarity lives. It's where purpose is remembered, not invented. And yet, we run from it. Because sitting with ourselves is uncomfortable. It means facing the thoughts we've pushed aside, hearing the doubts we try to silence, confronting the parts of ourselves we prefer to distract. But real growth doesn't happen when we're surrounded by validation. It happens when we can validate our own existence without needing applause. The world tells us to stay busy. Hustle culture sells us the illusion that stillness is stagnation. But the strongest trees grow in silence. The tallest mountains don't shout. There's something profoundly powerful about choosing solitude, not because you're pushed away, but because you understand that your next level of strength doesn't lie in what the world can give you, but in what you can uncover within yourself. Think about leaders who inspire, not because they talk the loudest, but because they know how to listen. Not just to others, but to themselves. They are the ones who can sit with silence and still find depth, who can be alone and still feel whole. That's not coincidence. That's training. That's choosing solitude, not for escape, but for recalibration. When everything is falling apart, people naturally look outward, blaming, grasping, panicking. But the real game changer is the person who chooses to go inward, who says, I'm going to sit with this. I'm going to listen to what this moment is trying to teach me. That takes courage. Far more courage than simply reacting. Because silence doesn't offer immediate answers. It doesn't soothe the ego. But it always tells the truth. You see, solitude doesn't disconnect you from the world. It reconnects you with your center. And when you are rooted in that center, you're no longer swayed by the storms outside. You don't need to pretend. You don't need to perform. You just need to be present. In solitude, you're not trying to be anything. You're just becoming more of yourself. Most people are afraid of being alone with their thoughts because they assume thoughts are fixed, that they define us. But thoughts are like clouds, they pass. What remains is awareness. The awareness that you are not your thoughts. You are the observer. And when you realize this, solitude becomes less about isolation and more about integration. You integrate the lessons, the emotions, the questions, and slowly you emerge clearer, stronger, calmer. Now, Let's talk about growth. Everyone loves the idea of growth, but few are ready for what it actually demands. Growth doesn't happen in comfort. It happens in chaos, in uncertainty, in those deeply uncomfortable moments where nothing seems to make sense. It's there, right there, that the roots begin to dig deeper. Not because we want them to, but because they must. Because the storm is forcing us to anchor ourselves in something more meaningful than circumstance. Most people think growth is linear. Like if you just keep working harder, keep moving forward, things will improve. But that's not how growth works. Growth is often disguised as failure, as confusion, as pain. It doesn't announce itself with trophies or applause. It comes wrapped in breakdowns, doubts, setbacks. And we miss it because we expect it to look pretty. But those who truly grow are the ones who understand that the mess is the message. That when life gets hardest, it's not punishing you, it's preparing you. For what? For a deeper version of yourself. For a life that is less reactive and more responsive. For leadership that comes not from telling others what to do, but from showing them who you are. You see, challenges don't create character. They reveal it. When everything feels like it's breaking, that's the moment life is asking, are you going to snap or are you going to stretch? Because growth doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for presence. It asks for honesty. It asks you to look at the parts of yourself that are uncomfortable and still say, I'm going to work with this. I'm not going to run. There's an idea we often miss. That adversity is not the opposite of growth. It is the birthplace of it. We don't become wise by having easy lives. We become wise by learning how to stay calm in the middle of the storm. Not by ignoring the storm, but by understanding that even the storm has a purpose. That calm doesn't mean passive. It means powerful. Because when you're calm, you're clear. And when you're clear, you stop making fear-based decisions. You start choosing based on values, not emotions. You stop reacting to the world and start shaping it. But none of that happens by accident. It starts with a decision. A decision to see solitude not as a retreat, but as training. To treat pain not as an enemy, but as a mentor. To look at chaos and say, there's something here I need to learn. We don't grow in the light. We grow in the shadows, in the quiet, in the solitude. That's where we learn how to hold ourselves together, not for the world, but for ourselves. That's where we realize that being calm is not about denying emotion. It's about honoring it without being ruled by it. Every time you choose to sit in solitude, every time you decide to lean into growth, even when it's uncomfortable, you are building something that cannot be taken away from you. You are building resilience. You are building clarity. You are building character. And that becomes your anchor, so that when life gets loud, you don't lose your voice. When things fall apart, you don't fall with them. You stand. Not because you've figured everything out, but because you've learned how to stand still and listen long enough to find the next right step. That's what staying calm truly is. It's the discipline of not abandoning yourself, even when everything else seems to be. It's the strength to trust that something greater is unfolding, even when the path is unclear. And it's the wisdom to know that solitude is not silence. It's where you finally hear what matters. There is a strange truth about human behavior. When we feel most overwhelmed, we tend to tighten our grip on people, on outcomes, on expectations. We try to hold everything closer, believing that control will create clarity. But what if the opposite is true? What if the breakthrough comes when we let go? We've been taught that detachment means indifference. That to detach is to stop caring. But this couldn't be further from the truth. Detachment is not apathy. It is awareness. It's the ability to say, I see what's happening, but I won't allow it to hijack my identity. That's the real difference. Because the moment we get emotionally entangled in every problem, we lose sight of who we are within the noise. Detachment is a skill. It's not something we're born with. It takes practice. It means learning to pause, to step back, to observe without immediate judgment. And that's hard because we're wired to react. Someone criticizes us, we defend. A plan fails, we scramble. A relationship changes, we panic, we get hooked. And in that moment, we forget our power. When we detach, we are not abandoning responsibility. We are reclaiming perspective. We're saying, I don't need to fix everything to feel okay. I don't need to control this to learn from it. And in doing so, we create space, space to reflect, space to choose, space to return to who we are without the emotional fog clouding our vision. That space becomes sacred. Because in that space, we start reconnecting with our purpose, with our values, with our direction. Too often, we're so entangled in the emotional weeds of life that we forget what we're even working toward. We become consumed by the problem and blind to the possibility. Detachment clears the way. It says, let me step out of the story long enough to see it clearly. There's a reason pilots are trained to zoom out on their instruments when in turbulence. They're taught not to obsess over one blinking light, but to maintain an aerial view of the entire system. That's how decisions are made, not in panic, but in perspective. The same principle applies to our emotional lives. If we stay zoomed in on the problem, we miss the solution that might be right beside it. Reconnection requires detachment. You can't see the whole picture while standing too close. You have to step back to see the patterns. You have to pause to hear the signal through the noise. That's why people who seem calm under pressure often seem distant, not because they don't care, but because they've learned how to observe without being swallowed by the storm. There's a deeper reason detachment matters. When we're attached to outcomes, we become prisoners of results. Our self-worth rises and falls with circumstances. But when we learn to detach, we gain freedom. Freedom from defining ourselves by what goes right or wrong. Freedom to try again without shame. Freedom to lead without the fear of failure owning us. That freedom leads to one of the most important emotional skills anyone can develop: discipline. Not the kind that comes from external force, but the internal kind. The discipline to stay grounded when the world tries to shake you. To stay thoughtful when your instincts scream to react. To choose alignment over approval. That is the essence of emotional discipline. We often think of discipline as restriction, but emotional discipline is liberation. It means you're no longer at the mercy of your mood. It means you've trained yourself not to be a puppet of the moment, but a steward of your values. That kind of discipline doesn't just show up when things are easy. It reveals itself when you're under fire, when you're disappointed, when you're exhausted. That's when your training speaks loudest. The challenge with emotional discipline is that it asks for intention. And intention takes work. Anyone can feel angry and explode. That takes zero effort. But to feel anger rise and choose to pause, that takes mastery. That takes self-respect. Because the person with discipline understands that emotions are messengers, not masters. We don't ignore our emotions. That's not discipline. That's denial. What we do is learn to read them, to listen to what they're trying to tell us, and then choose how to respond. That choice is where power lies. The power to say, I feel this, but I will not be controlled by it. That's leadership, not of others, but of self. Imagine two people in a crisis. One reacts immediately, frustrated, fearful, frantic. The other pauses, breathes, listens. Same crisis. Different outcome. Why? Because one gave away control. The other took it back. That's the power of emotional discipline. It's not about suppressing what you feel. It's about elevating how you act. This discipline is what allows relationships to thrive under pressure. It's what allows leaders to stay consistent in chaos. It's what allows individuals to stay true to their character when it would be easier to cave. Because without discipline, emotions become decisions. And not all emotions deserve that kind of influence. People who master this are not emotionless. They're emotionally intelligent. They still feel everything. But they've learned the difference between reacting to pain and responding with purpose. And they understand that the space between stimulus and response is where transformation lives. Here's what makes this hard. Discipline is invisible. No one sees the pause before you speak. No one applauds the decision not to lash out. No one rewards the internal battle you fight to stay composed. But those quiet victories shape who you become. They build a kind of integrity that can't be shaken, even when everything else falls apart. Emotional discipline also changes the stories we tell ourselves. Without it, we build narratives based on fear, on blame, on self-pity. But with it, we rewrite those stories. We say, this is painful, but I can grow through it. Or, this is uncertain, but I can move with clarity. That narrative shift is subtle, but it changes everything. The ability to detach and discipline the emotional self isn't about control for control's sake. It's about living from alignment, acting from principle, choosing what matters over what's momentary. It's about creating space, internally and externally, for better choices, deeper growth, and more meaningful connection. When you detach, you see clearly. When you discipline, you act wisely. And when those two forces combine, something remarkable happens. You stop living at the mercy of life's fluctuations and start leading yourself through them. You move from reaction to reflection, from impulse to intention. And in that shift, you don't just survive the storm, you redefine yourself within it. One of the greatest sources of frustration in life is the illusion of control. The idea that if we try harder, plan more, push longer, we can force things to go the way we want. But no matter how tightly we hold the steering wheel, life always finds a way to remind us that some things are simply not in our hands. And that truth, while uncomfortable, is also the key to personal freedom. Most people waste their emotional energy trying to control things they were never meant to. The opinions of others, the outcomes of situations, the past, the future, external circumstances that shift like weather patterns. And the more they try to manage those things, the more exhausted they become. It's like pouring water into a bucket with no bottom, effort without peace. But something changes when you begin to distinguish between what is within your control and what is not. That line, once clearly drawn, allows you to stop chasing and start choosing. You can't control how people receive your words, but you can control how you deliver them. With integrity, with intention, with clarity. You can't control the pace of the world, but you can control the pace at which you breathe, speak, and act. You can't control whether someone shows up for you, but you can choose how you show up for yourself. There is a quiet confidence that comes from recognizing your power, not in changing the world, but in managing how you meet it. That power is not loud, it doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it simply decides. And in that decision, something remarkable happens. Chaos begins to shrink. Not because the world changed, but because you did. When people focus on what they cannot control, they become victims of circumstance. When they focus on what they can control, they become architects of choice. The shift is subtle, but the impact is transformational. You may not be able to control whether a door closes, but you can choose whether or not you stay standing in front of it. That choice determines your direction. Control, when misunderstood, becomes a trap, but when redefined, it becomes a compass. It points you back to where your influence truly lies. Your words, your mindset, your energy, your time, your effort, your boundaries. Those are your tools. That is your lane. And when you stay in that lane, you stop tripping over everything that was never yours to carry in the first place. This kind of clarity also creates peace. Not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of perspective. You begin to see that surrender is not giving up. It's growing up. It's realizing that resistance drains, while acceptance empowers. And when you accept what you can't control, you're free to give your full energy to what you can. Sometimes, the most strategic move is not to push harder, but to pause. To reassess where your energy is going and ask yourself, is this fight mine? Is this outcome my responsibility? Because not every battle is worth your peace. Not every opinion deserves a response. Not every storm requires your presence. And sometimes, the highest form of control is the ability to walk away. But to develop this mindset, something deeper must shift, and that something is your relationship with pain. Because the moment you begin to reclaim your power, you will encounter discomfort. Growth always comes dressed in challenge. And the question becomes, what do you do with that pain? Pain is often treated like a problem, something to fix, to numb, to avoid. But pain, when approached with curiosity, becomes something else entirely. It becomes a teacher. It reveals what needs attention. It exposes what is unresolved. It invites you to look within, not to punish, but to understand. Pain is not random. It is intelligent. It arrives with a message. And most people miss that message because they're too busy trying to outrun it. But you can't grow through what you're not willing to sit with. You have to feel it to heal it. You have to listen before you leap. That's not weakness. It's wisdom. The mistake many people make is allowing pain to define them, to absorb the hurt so deeply that it becomes an identity. But pain is not who you are. It's something you've experienced. There's a difference. You are not the heartbreak. You are not the betrayer. You are not the betrayal. You are the person who is still here, still learning, still evolving. That perspective changes everything. When pain defines you, you build walls. But when pain teaches you, you build wisdom. You begin to see that the very thing that broke your rhythm also rebuilt your resilience. That what felt like an end was actually an invitation to begin again, more aware, more compassionate, more grounded. Pain also makes you pay attention. It slows you down, forces you to confront what you've ignored. It's a mirror, not a punishment. And when you face that reflection with honesty, you realize that the lesson was never about avoiding hardship, but about learning how to hold yourself with grace through it. Some of the strongest people in the world don't look like warriors. They don't walk around shouting about their strength, but they have walked through fire and come out softer, not weaker, softer, more open, more aware, more capable of empathy, of leadership, of love. Not because life spared them pain, but because they allowed pain to shape them without shrinking them. We spend so much time trying to avoid discomfort that we forget discomfort is how we grow. Muscles don't build without strain. Hearts don't expand without vulnerability. Minds don't evolve without challenge. The discomfort is the work, and the work is what refines you. You begin to see setbacks differently when you stop fearing pain and start learning from it. That rejection, maybe it revealed where you were seeking validation. That failure, perhaps it uncovered a deeper value you hadn't yet discovered. That grief, it might have awakened a capacity to care that you didn't know existed. Pain doesn't always answer your questions, but it always expands your awareness. When you allow pain to teach instead of define, you reclaim authorship over your story. You move from being a character in a tragedy to being the writer of a transformation. That doesn't mean the pain goes away, but it means it no longer decides who you become. Control what you can, learn from what you can't. That is the balance, that is the process. And the more you live by that principle, the more you realize that life isn't about escaping the hard parts. It's about growing through them with intention, clarity, and depth. There's something quietly powerful about people who walk into a room and don't need to announce themselves. They don't chase attention. They don't demand respect. They simply carry a presence. It's not the result of loudness or authority. It's energy. The kind of energy that's been cultivated, protected, and directed with care. We often underestimate how much of our life is shaped not by time or talent, but by energy. Where it goes. Who gets it? What drains it? What restores it? Most people wake up and give their best energy to things that give them the least in return. They pour it into arguments, expectations, fears, and distractions. And by the time they need it for something meaningful, they've got nothing left. Protecting your energy isn't selfish. It's strategic. It means understanding that you are not a limitless resource. That every thought, every interaction, every choice pulls from your internal reserves. And if you're not careful, you end up living on emotional overdraft, giving from emptiness and resenting what once brought you joy. This is why boundaries matter. Not because people are the problem, but because your peace is the priority. You don't need to be available to everything. You don't need to say yes to everyone. The more you protect your energy, the more powerful it becomes. Not in force, but in focus. Focus is what turns energy into momentum. Without it, energy is scattered, leaking into worry, comparison, and obligation. With it, energy becomes fuel for growth, for clarity, for creation. And that's where the magic happens, not when you're doing more, but when you're doing what matters with the energy that matters. You can tell a lot about a person by how they manage their energy. Some people walk into the world and absorb every emotion, every problem, every pressure. They're tired before the day begins. Others carry a shield, not to block people out, but to keep themselves whole. They know their limits. They honor their needs. They understand that rest is not a luxury. It's a responsibility. It's easy to confuse business with purpose. But being busy is not the same as being intentional. You can run through your entire life on empty, chasing productivity and calling it progress. Or you can slow down long enough to ask, is this adding to me or subtracting from me? Is this in alignment or just in motion? This awareness doesn't happen by accident. It happens when you pause, when you listen, when you begin treating your inner world like a place worth protecting, not something to constantly push through, but something to invest in. Because when your energy is strong, your presence becomes more than just a body in a room. It becomes influence. It becomes clarity. It becomes leadership. Leadership, in its truest form, starts with self. And self-leadership is impossible when your energy is scattered. You cannot guide others while neglecting yourself. You cannot pour into others while depleting yourself. You lead best when your energy is rooted, not reactive, not fragile, but steady. And steadiness is built through daily choices, not dramatic gestures. One of those daily choices is to stop chasing perfection. Perfection is a mirage. It moves the closer you get. It whispers, not yet, not good enough, not ready, no matter how far you've come. And if you believe it, you'll spend your life stuck in preparation, never stepping into progress. Progress is messy. It doesn't come with neat checklists or flawless execution. It's filled with mistakes, with learning curves, with awkward beginnings. And that's what makes it real. That's what makes it sustainable. Because progress embraces humanity. Perfection demands performance. When you choose progress over perfection, you give yourself permission to grow without shame. You no longer need to have it all figured out to take the next step. You no longer need to compare your chapter 2 to someone else's chapter 20. You no longer need to wait for conditions to be ideal. Because you realize they rarely are. Progress says, start where you are. Use what you have. Move anyway. And in that movement, confidence is built. Not from nailing it, but from showing up. From learning. From adapting. From proving to yourself that you can. The world doesn't need perfect people. It needs people willing to try, to fall, to rise, to repeat. That's how anything worthwhile is built. There's something deeply human about progress. It accepts imperfection. It welcomes feedback. It values the journey. Perfection, on the other hand, breeds fear. It punishes mistakes. It postpones action. It robs people of their creativity, their authenticity, their momentum. You'll notice this in conversations, in meetings, in relationships. The person waiting to be perfect before speaking rarely speaks. The person waiting to be perfect before loving never loves fully. The person waiting to be perfect before beginning never begins. And slowly, life passes, not because they lacked potential, but because they let fear speak louder than courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's the decision to move with it, to acknowledge the doubt and still write the email, still launch the idea, still say what needs to be said, still be seen even if you're not finished. Because no one is ever truly finished. And the more you embrace that truth, the freer you become. Progress teaches resilience. Every setback becomes a lesson, not a sentence. Every misstep becomes a redirection, not a reflection of your worth. It's how people bounce forward instead of falling back. They stop asking, did I do it perfectly? And start asking, what did I learn? What's the next step? This mindset doesn't just change how you grow. It changes how you lead others. Leaders who value progress create environments where people are safe to try, safe to fail, safe to evolve. They don't expect flawlessness, they expect effort. They reward courage, not just results. And in doing so, they build cultures of innovation, of trust, of movement. Movement matters. Because the world is not waiting for perfect people, it's waiting for present ones, engaged ones. Ones who are willing to show up with what they have and make something better one step at a time. That's where change begins. That's how impact is made, not in leaps, but in inches. Protecting your energy and choosing progress are deeply connected. Because when your energy is guarded, you stop spending it on perfectionism, on comparison, on doubt. You spend it on growth, on purpose, on people. You channel it into things that last longer than fear. You become someone others can count on, not because you have all the answers, but because you are anchored. You're not performing, you're present. You're not proving, you're contributing. And that contribution is never perfect. But it is real. And that's what makes it powerful.